Islam. Islam. Welcome to Moorish Heritage and History School class. I am RVBey, and I will be reading today until Anna Eve is availed. And we left off at chapter 3, at chapter 2. But I want to say this. This is the extension, although the last program we added to the blog, the 4 blogs that we have, this is truly the extension of the very first class that we started at New York, still going at New York, but only on the second and third Wednesdays are we physically there. And so it makes me feel very good to be able to bring this particular class of history. When Anna Eve thought of this idea of this book called White Cargo, and it's the forgotten history of Britain's white slaves in America. It's a wonderful idea because history and law cannot be separated. Some people say they're not interested in history or whatever, but you know what? If you want to know law, you have to know history. And in fact, this history right here from this book regarding modern Europeans as the original, they are Slavics and the original slaves here in the American land is very important because if you forget this or if you don't know this, you cannot move forward and take your position in terms of, we know what our condition is, but how about taking our position in the affairs of men? It's very, very important. Again, history and law can't be separated. So how is it that you have people who came here as slaves, as corporations, as charters, still are that, charters and corporations, telling you what you can and cannot do when you were the ones, your ancestors are the ones who established that peace document so that people could live here in peace. And here we are, years later, generations later, and we're just getting this, or we're under a false or a deceitful position. So I see this. Many people say you've been lied to, but I'm going to tell you, you really haven't been lied to. Now, there's something called trickery, deceit, and fraud, TDF. That's a lawful terminology. I'm sure if you're studying, you found it. Under trickery, deceit, and fraud, you have been lied to? Not really, because you may say, well, we went to school and they didn't teach us this. They just omitted it. So there's that fine line of, I didn't lie, I just didn't tell you. So this is what this is about. You get this behind you and understand who is who and what is what. And I think we can better take our place amongst the affairs of men and be the natural people that we are. So now I know that she finished the second chapter called The Judge's Dream, and also she put a short, brief message up to all of you who received the message about this class. But I don't have that in front of me, so what I'm going to do is just go back to a small portion of chapter 2 and then bring us to 3. This is so let me do that first from The Judge's Dream. All right. Now this is John Popham's. I'll just brief this. This is John Popham's colony, but he died. All right. He died, and everybody could now go home, and everybody did go home. All right. Hold on, let me put this where I can see in case there's a mess. All right. Thank you, son. Thank you. And everybody could now go home because John Popham colony, John Popham himself, died. So everybody could go home, and everybody did go home. The Popham colony decamped for England en masse, leaving the fort to decay. The colony had lasted little more than a year, and the colonists returned with little more than a few hundred birds. Most of those involved blamed the dreadful winter. Across the northern hemisphere, it had been the worst in their memory, or in memory. All our hopes have been frozen to death, wrote Sir Ferdinando Jorges. Now, I know that's a G for you guys who are reading it, but G's are silent, so it's not gorgeous. It's Jorges. The returning colonists reported that America was over cold. Hold on a minute. hold on. It looks like I lost something here. Go back to the studio. Okay, we're good. All right. That America, excuse me, most of those involved blamed the drift for cold. Across the northern hemisphere, it has been the worst in memory. All our hopes have been frozen to death, said Sir Ferdinand de Juarez. The returning colonists reported that America was over cold and, in respect of that, not habitable by our nation. In years to come, some patriotic American historians have written or expressed relief that the venture had failed. The abortion of Sagadahaki was the first, the last, the only attempt of the English corporation to fasten a moral pestilence on our northern shores. And this is what the 19th century historian John Wingate Thornton said. The Popham colony might have failed, but its philosophy would be revived many miles to the south, where the rival colony named Jamestown succeeded in putting down permanent roots. Within a decade, convicts and other representatives of England's cast-off would begin to arrive in the New World with the King's blessing. That ended 2. Chapter 3 is called The Merchant Prince. So let's begin that one. 650 miles south of the Popham colony, the London Company had secured its own precarious foothold in Virginia. Its settlers would face far worse than Popham's men, and they would survive, though only just survive. It would be here, along the James River, that England would begin to dump its unwanted and treat them like livestock. One 18th century writer would call conditions in the colony worse than Egyptian bondage. The London Company's expedition was led by a fierce one-armed veteran. Christopher Newport had made his reputation more than a decade earlier, plundering and burning on the Spanish Main as one of Sir Walter Raleigh's captains. He was grizzled and gruff and could have accumulated enough money to retire long before the London Company approached him. In 1592, he helped to capture the Madre de Dios, the huge Spanish treasure ship seized off of Santo Domingo. Captain Newport sailed her back to England, the richest prize that English privateers ever recorded. She carried gold and silver worth about $15 million at today's prices. It is not known what Christopher Newport's share was. As well as bullion, the Madre de Dios was said to be carrying a fabulous hoard of precious stones. The gems had vanished by the time Newport dropped anchor in home waters and welcomed visitors aboard. Every member of the crew is thought to have shared in them, presumably the captain amongst them. The London Company put Christopher Newport in command of a difficult group of men on board 3 ships. There was a 120-ton merchantman named the Susan Constant, and 2 smaller vessels, the Godspeed and the Discovery. Spread among them were 120 men and boys. A few were craftsmen, and 20 were listed as laborers. The biggest group comprised young gentlemen of one sort or another who had contracted to stay with the company for 7 years as tenants. They included young bloods dreaming of easy riches and troublesome never-to-do-wells, dispatched by their families to get rid of them or teach them a lesson. One member of the party described them as unruly gallants sent to Virginia to escape ill destiny. This voyage into the unknown was, he suggested, a chance for parents to disburden themselves of lascivious sons, masters of bad servants, and wives of ill husbands. Later, the alleged misbehavior of this gallant band would be used to justify the suspension of individual rights for the majority of colonial settlers. On this first voyage, it was the behavior of the leaders that most threatened the enterprise. They were domineering, fractious. There was Newport's number 2, the aggressively self-confident Bartholomew Gosnold, whose own expedition 5 years earlier had done so much to turn English eyes towards America again. There was the former soldier Edward Maria Wingfield, who had mortgaged his estate to take a block of shares in the venture. He was the only major stockholder coming along to risk his life as well as his money. There was Captain John Martin, the son of London's leading goldsmith, who was obsessed with finding gold, and George Percy, the arrogant brother of the Duke of Northumberland. Most disruptive of all was the turbulent adventurer John Smith, a yeoman farmer's son who, according to his own account, would one day be saved from death by the Native American Princess Pocahontas. Smith was a vividly persuasive writer who portrayed himself as the heroic savior of the colony, and perhaps he was. He would certainly go down in history as one of the most significant players in the American story. Of the rest of the party, the histories of some gentlemen on board are known, but nothing about the fry, the scattering of servants, and the 20 laborers brought to do the manual work. In the 1600s, there was no Robert Tressel to record their stories. All we know is that they were waged men, and that there would soon be complaint that there weren't nearly enough of them to build a colony. The flotilla set sail from London in Christmas week 1606, watched wistfully, no doubt, by an eminent prisoner in the Tower, the inspiration of them all, Sir Walter Raleigh. The battlement of his prison must have afforded a fine view of the 3 ships as they upped anchor and made their way downstream. Of all the spectators who witnessed them depart, Raleigh was among the few who could have had an inkling of how momentous the event taking place might prove to be. It was a meticulously planned expedition, equipped with mining and building tools, large stocks of arms and ammunition, and food calculated to feed everyone for a year. Carried in Christopher Newport's cabin was a sealed list of instructions from the Royal Council for Virginia that were to be opened within 24 hours of landing. In 5 pages, the instructions covered everything from relations with the natural people of the country, and they had that quote-unquote, to whom should lead the hunt for gold. The document also contained the names of 7 men picked to form an administrative council that would choose a president and rule the colony. Not even those named yet knew who they were. Newport's problems began when, like Henry Chalon, he chose the longer route to America via the Azores. A series of setbacks en route saw the party spend 19 fractious weeks at sea, eating into their food supplies and into their tempers. Long, claustrophobic days at sea could have fatal results. On both the first circumnavigation of the world by Ferdinand Magellan and the second by Sir Francis Drake, shipboard relations took such terrible turns that the commanders hanged good friends on both occasions, crying mutiny. Newport found himself similarly placed as the collection of supersized egos around him clashed. Finally, at a stopover in the Azores, he erected gallows, fully intending to execute John Smith. Although Newport relented and postponed the execution, the rancor and bickering continued up to the moment of landing. When the flotilla finally sighted mainland America at what should have been a moment for rejoicing, a row broke out. It was just after dawn on a Sunday in April 1607. The ship had been blown by a storm to the mouth of Chesapeake Bay. When Newport opted to make for the invitingly sheltered waters of the bay, he was furiously criticized by Bartholomew Gosnold, who insisted it was a bad decision and tried to force Newport to head out again and steer northward. Newport indignantly refused. They entered the bay and anchored, sending a party of 20 men ashore to scout around. According to John Smith, the party was met with a shower of arrows from the natives. A volley of musket fire from the Susan Constant put the attackers to flight, but it was a bad start. What followed in the Chesapeake would be far grimmer than anything experienced by Sir John Popham's colonists. The latter would be lambasted for scurrying back home after a harsh winter and a small number of deaths. Disease, desertion, and attack by Native Americans cut the London Company's numbers far more savagely over a similar period and cut them again and again after reinforcements arrived. As a modern British historian puts it, the more the early history of Virginia is studied, the more it must and did appear miraculous that the colony survived. Sir Thomas Smith, other members of the Royal Council of Virginia, had not expected the expedition to be anything less than hard-going, as was evident from the secret instructions. They were the foundations for what Richard Hakluyt would later call a prison without walls. One instruction barred anyone from quitting the colony. Quote, suffer no man to return but by passport. Another banned all communication with the homeland, and one warned of disorder, directing that in laying out the settlement, every street should be wide and straight so that with low field pieces you may command every street throughout. It is doubtful that all the instructions were read out to every one of the 120 men and boys in the party. If they had been read out, it is unlikely that many would have been especially bothered. Most of the young adventurers were too gripped by gold fever to worry about much else. They spent several weeks exploring, endowing every striking spur and landmark with an English name. Let me read that again. I'm sorry. They spent several weeks exploring and endowing every striking spur and landmark with an English name, usually of a British royal, like tomcats marking their territory. Finally, they identified what seemed the ideal location for a fort on an easily defensible island on the James River, and so Fort James was established. It would later become known as Jamestown. The site proved anything but ideal. The fragility of the project was swiftly brought home to them, or should have been. Having picked the site for their fort, the most capable leaders, Gosnold and Newport, left others to begin constructing it and took men off on a week-long search for gold. While they were gone, an attack by the Algonquian tribesmen almost overwhelmed those left behind. By Algonquin tribesmen, almost while they were gone and attacked by Algonquin, let me start this over again. While they were gone and attacked by Algonquin tribesmen, almost overwhelmed those that were left behind. The colonists were busy clearing the ground and were so oblivious to danger that firearms had not even been distributed. When the attack came, it was claimed 200 or more tribesmen were involved. As the Algonquin charged out of concealment in the woods, several gentlemen with guns just managed to hold them off, but it took cannon and musketry from the Susan Constant to turn the attackers back. It was a close call. Most of the council was hurt, a boy slain in the tenants, and 13 or 14 more hurt. For days, the future Jamestown was under virtual siege. On-off war with the local inhabitants became par for the course. Little was known in England about the Algonquin people who had named the great inlet around which they lived, Chesapeake, Great Shellfish Bay. The secret instructions called for great care to be taken, not to offend the natural people of the country, but also assume the worst. The colonists were instructed that if they shot at the naturals, they should employ the best marksmen. If you miss, they will think your weapon not so terrible. No doubt, the still greater shock and awe capacity of a Susan Constant broadside was added comfort for the colonists. One of the other forces undermining the colonists was disease. Disease struck almost as quickly as the Algonquin. The riverside chosen for Jamestown was on top of a mosquito-ridden swamp used by some of the party as a latrine and drinking well. Within a month of the departure of Christopher Newport's flotilla for England in July for supplies and new recruits, the colonists began to die in ones and twos. The suffering has been depicted with Gothic gusto by later historians, but the roll call of death recorded by one of the colonists is coldly eloquent, and it is as follows. The 6th of August, there died John Ashby of the Bloody Flux. The 9th day died George Flower of the Swelling. The 10th day died William Brewster, gentleman, of a wound given by the savages. The 14th day, Jerome Alicock, it says Ali Cock, together as one word, ancient, died of a wound. The same day, Francis Midwinter, Edward Morris, corporal, died suddenly. The 15th day, there died Edward Brown and Stephen Gothrop. The 16th day, there died Thomas Gower, gentleman. The 17th day, there died Thomas Mounsley. The 18th day, there died Robert Pennington and John Martin, gentlemen. The 19th day died Drew Pegasi, gentlemen. The 2 and 20th day of August, there died Captain Bartholomew Gosnell, one of our council. I'm just highlighting the ancient. We're going to look him up. Okay. More than half would be dead by the time Christopher Newport returned in October. He had left 104 alive. 48 were still living on his return. Most of the reinforcements he brought would soon die too. So would the majority of the following year's intake, because hunger followed on disease. Too little food had been sent, too much consumed in the early days, and too much lost to rats that had migrated with the settlers to the New World when they brought them with them. There had been a belief that sufficient supplies could be traded from the Native Americans to tide the colony over till its own crops were harvested. This was a terrible mistake. In 1608, the rats devoured the first crop of English corn, and the fledgling community was driven alternatively to negotiate, trade, or raid for foodstuffs. But none of that was sufficient, and famine did set in. The starving time was approaching. As conditions worsened, the leaders on the ruling council squabbled and connived and replaced one another. One was hanged for mutiny. In this sorry atmosphere, some young bloods vanished and somehow made their way back to England. But others, excuse me, I just have to clear my throat for a second. All right. All right. Are we back? I didn't need to take that long of a break. I almost lost the show there. So please bear with me. I just need to know that I am back online here. I apologize. I just need a message to know that I'm back online. All right. All right. So, just a second, everyone. All right. So, let me pick up where we left off at. So excuse me for that. I took a break to cough, and then I almost lost the show here. All right. If you would just give me a second to get my please. Sorry for that. Okay. All right, so the corn and the crops were okay. They needed to let me go back to this page here, to this line. Alternatively, they needed to negotiate trade or raid for foodstuffs, but none of that was sufficient, and famine did set in. The starving time was approaching. As conditions worsened, the leaders on the ruling council squabbled and connived and replaced one another. One was hanged for mutiny. In this sorry atmosphere, some young bloods vanished and somehow made their way back to England, but others were still hypnotized by gold, and they remained. It was the same with the colony's backers in London. The company kept the money flowing on the premise that gold and other rich minerals, principally copper, would be found eventually. They thought they had found gold on several occasions. A report by an Irishman, Francis Magill, obtained by the Spanish Council of State, claimed that rich samples of gold, silver, and copper had been sent to England. Magill reckoned the authorities blocked all communications home not to prevent bad news getting out, to prevent the outside world knowing that immense wealth was there for the taking. One of the most embarrassing episodes in the search for gold occurred after a mineral expert from England noticed a glittering clay-like substance used by one of the local tribes to daub their bodies. The expert thought the glitter came from specks of gold. A party of colonists, led by an Algonquin guide, trekked into the hills to locate the mine from which the gold-bearing clay was extracted. They returned with a barrel load of the stuff. An excited Christopher Newport assumed that he was about to become a very rich man and hurried back to England in the Susan Constant with the barrel of clay and the minerals expert. The impact of the news of the gold on those of the settlers who were still alive was described succinctly by John Smith. There was now no talk, no hope, no work, but dig gold, wash gold, refine gold, load gold. Smith was a lone voice on the council, urging other priorities. In England, Newport and his expert presented the barrel and its glittering contents to Sir Walter Cope, the Chancellor, who was a member of the Royal Council of Virginia. An ecstatic Cope passed the news to Robert Cecil. "There is but a barrel full of the earth," he said, "but there seems a kingdom full of the ore." He counseled Cecil that even digging down a couple of spadefuls, the ore appears on every part as a solid body, a treasure endlessly proportioned by God. Almost immediately, Sir Walter had to swallow his words. This other day, we sent you news of gold, and this day we cannot return you so much as copper. Our new discovery is more like to prove the land of Canaan than the land of Ophir. Forecasts by the most experienced men in London showed it was fool's gold. In the end, all turned to vapor. It is not known whether the rethink in London was prompted by this episode or by the increasing number of disaster stories coming from the colony, the deaths and desertion, or by the drain on funds. But rethink there was. The thrust of it was set out in the Jacobean equivalent of a position paper drawn up for Sir Thomas Smith, treasurer of the London Company. In the early weeks of 1609, under the heading, The Colonizing of Virginia, running to nearly 12,000 words, the unsigned document was an assessment of Virginia by someone closely attuned to James I's prejudices and ambition. It urged that gold should be forgotten and a trading colony developed. Trade is the best mine and the greatest wealth which a prince can possess, it argued. The anonymous author asserted that trade had transformed England into a wealthy power over the previous century and promised greater things yet if the natural wealth of America was harnessed properly. The king evidently listened. In May 1609, he issued a new charter that exchanged royal control of Virginia for commercial control by the merchants of the London branch of the Virginia Company. The squabbling colonial executive in Jamestown was abolished. In its place, the colony was to be brought under a governor with dictatorial powers. Above him in London was a new royal council and the London Company's court, or board of directors. Above them all was the guiding hand of the company's treasurer, Sir Thomas Smith, and it would be his hand that planted the seed of white slavery. Few Englishmen could have appeared better qualified than Smith to turn Virginia into a success. He is a strangely forgotten figure now, but for centuries his commercial stature was recognized by historians. The great Victorian Alexander Brown said of him, he was the head of everyone and a founder of most of them, of the English companies directly interested in foreign colonies and commerce, which have ever since been the chief sources of the wealth and power of Great Britain. In Muscovy, the Tsar publicly acknowledged Smith's eminence. When the merchants arrived at the head of an English mission, he was allowed to remain haddock in the royal presence, a signal honor. In Agra, the great mogul had a portrait of Smith hanging in his palace. In the Cape, men of the Khoi tribe reportedly chanted, Sir Thomas Smith, English ship. Whenever a ship flying the red and white striped flag of the East India Company anchored in Table Bay. Smith combined astute risk-taking with ruthlessness and the wooing of princes. In India, he learned that the great mogul and his son were heavy drinkers and regularly supplied the mogul with the best burgundy. Smith also sent the mogul a full-size replica of the Lord Mayor of London's coach like that used to this day to lead the Lord Mayor's annual procession. Smith constantly cultivated the court of St. James. After the king developed an interest in exotic mammals and birds, Smith had his captains return with parakeets and monkeys, big cats and bears for the royal cages. When James expressed interest in the flying squirrels rumored to exist in America, the order went out to Smith's ships to bring some back. King James was also by ship, so in 1610, Smith invited him to launch one of his India men, a 1,200-ton monster called the Trades Increase. The event gives a glimpse of the style of the man and his relationship with the king. On the day of the launch, James, together with the queen, the heir to the throne, Prince Henry, and other members of the royal family, were rowed in the royal barge to Deptford, where the ship had been built. Other members of the court followed in what must have been, in the manner of the times, a splendid cavalcade stretching downstream from the Palace of Whitehall to Deptford. After the launch came a bountiful banquet with all kinds of delicacies and fine china dishes, and then a royal presentation. The king, it was reported, graced Sir Thomas Smith, the governor, with a very fair chain of gold, with a jewel wherein was the king's picture hanging at it. And the king put it about his neck with his own hand. A few months before, the Trades Increase was launched over the direction of Virginia. An immediate and crucial decision was the appointment of the right caliber of men to take control of the colony on the ground. Whoever was picked as governor would have autocratic powers and an almost monarchical status. All right? The choice eventually fell on 34-year-old Thomas West, Baron de la Warr, W-A-R-R. He and Thomas Smith were old comrades. They had fought alongside each other in the raid on Cadiz, where both had been commended for bravery, and both had later been caught up in the Essex Rebellion, but survived. They had much in common, and no doubt were of a mind on how to revive fortune in America. Smith appointed 3 seasoned fighting men to serve under De La Warr. Sir George Somers, who had fought under Walter Raleigh, was made admiral of a new fleet to relieve the colony. Sir Thomas Gates, a veteran of war in the Netherlands, was appointed deputy governor, and Sir Thomas Dale, another veteran of the Dutch wars, was made high marshal. The next requirement was to install a belief in the Virginia project in the public mind and raise money. The damage done by the stories of death and disaster filtering across the Atlantic can be gauged from a broadside published in rebuttal a few years later. It attacked the malicious and looser sort who wet their tongues with scornful taunt about the colony and asserted there is no common speech nor public name of anything this day except be the name of God, which is more vividly depraved, traduced, and derided by such unhallowed lips than the name of Virginia. The company launched a vigorous promotional campaign. Clerics were commissioned to urge congregations to go forward to assist this noble action. All the merchants connected with the company went to work on their friends. The little printing shops huddled around St. Paul's churchyard were paid to pump out broadsides and circulars lauding Virginia as an earthly paradise, a delicious land with gentle natives and one of the goodliest countries under the sun. Played on the patriotism and self-interest of Jacobean England. A broadside dedicated to him read as follows. The eyes of all Europe are looking upon our endeavors to spread the gospel among the heathen people of Virginia, to plant an English nation there, and to settle a trade in those parts which may be peculiar to our nation, to the end we may thereby be secured from being eaten out of all profits of trade by our industrious neighbors, the Dutch. It became a priority to attract skilled workers rather than another batch of gentlemen adventurers. Every person that hath a trade or a body able to endure a day's labors was promised 100 acres of land at the end of 7 years' service. Smith, who clearly had no problems mixing with the low as well as the high, had a letter circulated that invited workmen of whatever craft who had any occupation to meet him at his house in Philpott Street. There, in his cheapside mansion, the richest man in England was waiting to offer sawyers, tile makers, soap ashmen, pearl drillers, plowmen, carpenters, blacksmiths, and sturgeon dressers, and all the other craftsmen and tradesmen, housing, food, clothes, a cash payment, and land if they would sign up for the New World. The net was cast wide. Glassmakers and winemakers were recruited from France and pottage workers from Poland. Ministers of religion were on the recruitment list, too. The company issued instructions for Native American children to be kidnapped so they could be made into good Protestants. Whether Smith followed problems laid by recruiting from the gallows at this early stage is not known, but efforts were made to persuade the city of London to subsidize the relocation of the surplus poor. Two of those promoting the Virginia Company, Robert Johnson and Robert Gray, put the case for relocation using the arguments about an England drowning in vagrants. Johnson warned that unless the swarms of idle persons were found foreign employment, they would infect one another with vice and villainy, worse than the plague itself. The idea of an American solution to the problem of the poor appealed to the burghers of London. The very mention of the ragged masses who packed the tenements of Whitefriars, Aldgate, and Southwark prompted shivers of distaste and apprehension. When the Virginia Company offered to transport one poor inmate from the metropolis for every new share in the company purchased by the burghers, the Lord Mayor responded encouragingly. However, little appears to have come of this proposal. Nothing more would be heard of the idea of shipping out the adult poor for more than a decade. When not interviewing colonists, Sir Thomas, he tried the cobblestones between the halls of the great livery company. He banked on their financial support, making an offer of either a cash dividend from the gold or other valuable commodity the company was bound to amass, or a dividend in land. Either way, it would be payable after 7 years. An investor buying a single 1210 share could look forward eventually to a return of at least 500 acres. I just wanted to say, payable after 7 years, that's indentured slavery. All right. It was not an easy task to persuade his fellow merchant. The timing was appalling, for another venture was just being launched. This was the Ulster plantation, and the king let it be known that he regarded support for this Irish project as a patriotic obligation. Smith, therefore, had an uphill struggle. His own livery company, the Skinners, bought only 62 of shares. The fishmonger's offer was so paltry it was scornfully refused. All told, the livery companies invested only a quarter of what he expected. In the end, 30 companies and 650 individuals took Virginia's 1210 shares, but that brought in only 18,000. Smith had hoped for 30,000. Despite the problems, a fleet was assembled to relieve and resupply Jamestown. It represented one of the largest colonial expeditions so far mounted by a European power. 9 ships with 600 settlers, including a scattering of women, set sail from Plymouth in the early summer of 1609. It was led by Sir Thomas Gates and Sir George Somers and would be known as the Third Supply. The new governor of the colony, Lord de la Warr, was to follow on later. Luck was not with them. Off the Azores, a hurricane scattered the fleet. The flagship Sea Venture, carrying Somers, Gates, and another 150 passengers, was blown hundreds of miles off course. The storm was graphically described by one of the passengers, William Stretchy, as the sea swelled above the clouds, said Stretchy, and gave battle unto heaven. A huge wave enveloped the vessel like a garment or a vast cloud. From almost every joint, the ship spewed out her oakham, so that water rose swiftly in the hold. Terror turned the blood of even the bravest mariners. For 3 days, Somers was constantly at the helm, with everyone else bailing and plugging and throwing stores overboard to keep the Sea Venture afloat. The battered vessel eventually found herself in the Bermuda Archipelago, dreaded by mariners as the Isle of Devils. Around these reefs, they said, you could hear the howling of the demons who lurked, awaiting the sight of a sail to whip up a maelstrom. It was assumed that none caught in their seas could possibly survive. Against all odds, the Sea Venture stayed intact until Somers was able to beach her on one of the islands. She ended up in what we know today as Discovery Bay, Bermuda. The island was uninhabited, but a previous shipwreck had marooned a number of hogs there. The pigs had multiplied enormously and were easy to hunt down. A diet of pork, grapefruit, and wild berries kept the survivors going. But they did not confine themselves just to catching food to survive. Somers and Gates were determined men. Amongst the marooned were skilled carpenters and a shipwright. They were put to work to design and build a ship to take the party on their interrupted journey. Using oak salvage from the Sea Venture and cedar wood from the island, the survivors built not one but 2 pinnacles to carry them on to Virginia. The Patience and the Deliverance set sail 42 weeks after the Sea Venture was wrecked. Their voyage took 10 weeks. When the news of their epic story reached London, it caused a sensation. During the time on the island, Gates and Somers had imposed a ruthless regime, executing a group of men who questioned their authority. That was ignored. Instead, England celebrated what was seen as something truly miraculous. William Shakespeare immortalized the saga, drawing on it for his last great play called The Tempest. In Act 1, Shakespeare has the magician king Prospero order up a storm so terrible that not a soul but felt the fever of the mad, only to relent after the intercession of his daughter Miranda, and to tell her as follows: Wipe thou thine eyes, have comfort. The direful spectacle of the wreck which touched the very virtue of compassion in thee, I have with such provision in mine art, so safely ordered, that there is no soul, no, not so much perdition as an hair betid to any creature in the vessel, which thou heardest cry, which thou sawest sing. No doubt. Let me see, I got a little signal here, so y'all just hold on a second. All right, a little loud there. No doubt, some of the leading lights in the Virginia Company watched the first performance of The Tempest. Of The Tempest on Hollow Mass Night in November 1611. Okay. In the presence of the king, Shakespeare's patron, the Earl of Southampton, was a founder member of the Virginia Company, and Shakespeare himself was an investor. Were the Earl and his friend Sir Thomas Smith among the courtiers applauding on that first night in the palace of Whitehall? In Jamestown, there was nothing to applaud. When Sir Thomas Gates and Sir George Somers and the other survivors of the Sea Venture finally made the Jamestown settlement in 1610, they found that the colony marketed as an earthly paradise by Sir Thomas Smith was more akin to hell. The ships of the third supply were supposed to have brought relief with adequate supplies and reinforcements. 6 of the vessels, though battered by the hurricane, did make port at Jamestown, but they had few supplies and didn't stay long. 4 left inside a month, taking with them the only man who had shown real ability as a leader, John Smith. As food supplies again ran out in Jamestown, the starving time had set in. Just how bad it was will always be unclear. A rush of self-serving and contradictory reports muddied the waters then and forever. What is certain is that when the survivors of the Sea Venture finally arrived at Jamestown from Bermuda, they found a ghost town. Behind the palisades, there were broken down dwellings, a ruined church, and filthy, rubble-strewn streets. Sir Thomas Gates, the senior commander, decided that it was pointless to start again and decided to abandon the settlement, taking the remaining colonists, numbering between 40 and 60. Gates was preparing to make for Newfoundland when De La Warr appeared with a relief fleet and turned him back. The new governor, no doubt, heard many explanations as to what had happened to the settlers. One eyewitness account was from George Percy, the last president of the Colonial Council, who later wrote up in his recollections. He had seen near constant fighting with the Native Americans who made it impossible to stray much beyond the Palisades. And then mass starvation set in, the prelude to a grim descent into cannibalism. After supplies of fish and corn ran out, horses and other beasts were eaten by colonists. Next, they caught vermin, dogs, and cats, and rats, and mice. Then they ate boots and shoes or any other thing that was leather. There were frantic forays into the woods, which netted a few snakes and some wild and unknown roots. Finally, they dug up the corpse. Famine began to look so ghastly and pale in every face that nothing was spared to preserve life, Percy recalled. One man murdered his wife and chopped her in pieces and salted her for his food. The man was discovered with her partly eaten corpse, and on Percy's orders hung up by his thumbs till he confessed, and then he was executed. The colonists themselves were blamed for their troubles and blamed each other. Stories of theft, murder, and mutiny emerged, and of astonishing lassitude and torpor. Too many of the settlers were drunken, gluttonous loiterers. Too many were of the vulgar and viler sort, who went thither for ease and idleness, profit and pleasure, and found contrariwise that they must labor or not eat. Before the governor could do anything much to put the colony to rights, he himself apparently became a victim of Jamestown. 6 months after landing, he reportedly collapsed. What was wrong with him was never satisfactorily explained. The suspicion lingers that it might have been as much the daunting task he faced in rescuing the colony rather than the bite of an insect that disabled him. Whatever the truth, he ordered a ship to take him away from the Chesapeake to the healthier climes of the Caribbean. From there, he eventually went back to England. In an age when people firmly believed and auguries, this was not a good one. His lordship was never officially replaced as governor. In his place, Sir Thomas Dale, followed by the Sir Thomas Gate, then Sir Thomas Dale again, served as acting governor. They would be credited with rescuing the colony and setting in on the path to prosperity. The most indelible mark was left by Dale. The High Marshal has been described as a sturdy watchdog, tearing and rending with a cruelty equal to his zeal every offender against the common weal. W-E-A-L. They hadn't put wealth on it, but commonwealth. He began to acquire that reputation from day one. On arrival in Jamestown, after Lord de la Warr's departure, he announced a new legal code for the colony, of which the Taliban would have approved. The laws, divine, moral, and martial, were most probably drawn up by de la Warr, Gates, and Dale in consultation with Smith. They would become known as Dale's Code because it was he who implemented them. They were based on a code designed by a Dutch prince to keep his troops in order and required unquestioning obedience in everything. And they are as follows. No manner of person whatsoever, contrary to the word of God, shall detract, slander, calumniate, murmur, mutiny, resist, disobey, or neglect the commandment either of the Lord Governor and Captain General, the Lieutenant General, the Marshal, the Council, or any authorized captain, commander, or public officer upon pain for the first time, so offending to be whipped 30 times, and upon his knees to acknowledge his offense, asking forgiveness upon the Sabbath day in the assembly of the congregation, and for the second time, so offending, to be condemned to the galley for 3 years, and for the third time, so offending, to be punished with death. 3 strikes, you're out, huh? Even intemperate railings against authority was a capital offense carrying the same punishment as murder or sodomy. Along with murder, sodomy, rape, and lese majesty, the code made blasphemy and irregular attendance at a church capital crime. Made blasphemy and irregular attendance at church a capital crime. Everyone had to attend church twice a day. On Sundays, a bell sounded half an hour before the first service of Jamestown were barred and guarded, while search parties went into every building looking for anyone that was not in church. Those caught missing church 3 times faced execution. Special moral guards, 4 per preacher, were to be appointed to spy and report on what went on at other times. Englishmen had probably experienced nothing like it, since their ancestors were made serfs by their Norman conquerors 5.5 centuries before. Trading with the Native Americans was a capital crime, as was leaving the colony without permission or selling anything to visiting sailors. Pilfering a few potatoes could get you executed, and so, in theory, could the plucking of a rose. And it says this as a quote here: "What man or woman shall rob any garden, public or private, being set to weed the same, or willfully pluck up therein any root, herb, or flower, or gather up the grapes, or steal any ears of the corn grown, shall be punished with death." Almost everything was to be communal. Meals were all to be eaten in refectories. There was no private ownership. All work was for the company. Overseers stood over you to ensure that no one was negligent and idle. Tools and implements, even your own, had to be handed in when a drum or whistle sounded to end the day. The one mitigating factor was that the official working day was considerably shorter than in England, perhaps because of the climate or to allow for military duties. Not everyone had to labor. The extraordinary men, divines, governors, ministers of state and justice, knights, gentlemen, physicians, and such as be men of worth for special purposes, were not required to work. As ever, England's class system automatically transferred across the seas. Dale enforced the laws to the hilt. Though a deeply pious man, he must have struck fear into friends as well as foes. On one occasion, he lost his temper with Christopher Newport, grasped the veteran captain by his beard, and shouted that he would execute him. Newport's mistake, it seems, was to have sounded too wildly positive about Virginia. George Percy was a witness to the exemplary punishments Dale handed out on the capture of 6 colonists who deserted after being ordered to help build a new fort. The fugitives had headed south in an attempt to reach Spanish-held territory, 1,000 kilometers away in Florida. The High Marshal employed Native Americans to track down the fugitives and bring them back. Percy reported. Some he appointed to be hanged, some burnt, some to be broken upon wheels, others to be staked, and some to be shot to death. These faced a more protracted death. They were bound to trees and left there to suffer the attentions of a roaming bear or to starve. Similar treatment was meted out to anyone infringing the religious requirements. One blasphemer had a red-hot bodkin plunged through his tongue after he was chained to a tree and left to his fate. Another miscreant was similarly mutilated and then forced through a guard of 40 men to be butted by each one and then kicked out of the fort, no doubt to perish. Dale was less than a year into his term in the colony when he took the momentous step of calling on the Crown to provide convict labor. In desperate need of settlers, Virginia's hard man addressed the matter in his typically blunt way. in a personal letter to King James in August 1611. He vowed that if he could be furnished with 2,000 men by the following April, he would overcome the Algonquin tribes and completely settle the colony within 2 years. Recognizing the impossibility of raising so many men so quickly, he urged the king to banish hither all offenders, condemned to die out of common gales for the next 3 years. It would be a ready way to furnish us with the men, and not always with the worst of men, either for birth, for spirit, or body. Dale added that this was how the Spaniards do people the Indies. Francis Bacon, the future Attorney General, led the opposition to the scum of England being allowed to infect the colony. The views of this body of opinion had previously been summed up in one of the broadsides issued in 1609 during the company's promotional campaign. It would be a scandal and peril to accept as settlers idle and wicked persons, the weeds of their native country. It would be a scandal and a peril to accept as settlers idle and wicked persons, the weeds of their native country, the broadside warned. Broadside is a newspaper. I just wanted to let you know that. They would act as poison in the body of a tender, unformed colony. What were needed were men who could show a character for religion and considerate conduct in his relations with his neighbors. Others, not least in the Privy Council, were insistent that some way had to be found to dispose of convicts and the country's swarms of vagrants. They argued that famine and pestilence would only disappear from England if all the unwanted could be shipped abroad. King James certainly took this line. He was a timid man who wore specially padded doublets to protect against the assassin's knife. After succeeding to the throne in March 1603, his first appearance in London coincided with the devastating outbreak of plague in the capital. As always, it struck first and worst in the liberties and other slums where vagrants concentrated. The new monarch arrived to find the merchants and gentry of London escaping en masse to the countryside in search of safety. The king immediately followed suit and fled the capital. He took with him the lesson that the poor had to go. Sir Thomas Smith was not one to argue with the king. A broadside dedicated to Smith carried exactly the message James wanted to hear. It warned that unless somewhere far away was found for the swarms of the lewd and the idle, more prisons would have to be built. One recurring proposal to rid the land of convicts was to exchange them with Christian galley slaves held by the Turkish or North African corsairs. 4 convicts for 1 galley slave was the suggested exchange rate. Another proposal was to seek a remote, unpopulated location somewhere far away where England's felons could be dumped, provided with seeds to plant and left there to sink or swim. Sir Thomas Smith led the search for a site and initially considered South Africa rather than America. A letter written to Smith in 1609 by one of his agents, Thomas Aldworth, put the case for a site at the Cape of Good Hope. Aldworth had anchored in Table Bay while he was en route for India and liked what he saw. An earlier European visitor had carved a huge cross on the steep mountain overlooking the bay. The vegetation grew lushly on the narrow peninsula, and the natives seemed friendly. Aldworth reported enthusiastically to Smith, courteous and tractable folk, and was just the place to send convicts. Well, the area could take 100 English convicts a year. He estimated, always cautious, Smith decided to send just 10 convicts to see how they fared. How and where he obtained them, we do not know. However, they included a highwayman called James Cross, whose name we know because the company listed him as the men's leader in the Cape. Cross and the other 9 were duly landed at Table Bay and presented with what Smith's men deemed sufficient for their survival: half a peck of turnip seeds, a few other seeds, and a spade to dig the ground. Unsurprisingly, the experiment was a failure. Cross and the other convicts had been left with no arms with which to protect themselves, and they were terrified when they saw tribesmen from the local Khoi people in the distance. Maybe they had heard how Portuguese traders had once been massacred here after falling out with the Khoi. The convicts hid and managed to evade the natives. Somehow they reached a rocky island just off Table Bay. It was a refuge that would one day be notorious as Robben Island, the prison where Nelson Mandela and so many other fighters against apartheid were held 3 centuries later. Here, the 10 Englishmen eked out a miserable existence, probably living on shellfish or the seals that bask on the shore. Eventually, a visiting ship took pity on them and took them off. 3 of the convicts got back to England. Within hours, they had become embroiled in a purse snatch and were arrested. They were later executed. Smith tried once more. He ordered another group of convicts to be sent to the Cape aboard one of his India-bound ships. When they reached Table Bay and anchored, the convicts begged the captain to hang them rather than leave them in Africa. He couldn't oblige. Following orders, they too were dumped on the shore. However, Lady Luck was with this group. Another passing ship took them off within a couple of days. Nearly 2 centuries would pass before England would again send convicts to the Cape. The argument steered up in 1611 by Sir Thomas Dale's call for convicts simmered for the next 4 years. Meanwhile, out of sight over in America, far bloodier contests were taking place as the Virginia Company's twin martinets, Sir Thomas Dale and Sir Thomas Gates, sent settlers out to build forts beyond the Chesapeake and deeper into the Algonquian territory. This was the period of Pocahontas, the fairy tale story of the bewitching Native American princess who saved English colonists from massacre, was kidnapped by one of them, and fell in love with another, gripped contemporaries just as it gripped later generations. It also lent a welcome romance to the colonizing process. The following, a typically lyrical description of Virginia in these years, is from Mary Johnston's Pioneers of the Old South, and it goes as follows. As the company sent over more colonists, there began to show up and down the James, though at far intervals, cabins and clearings made by white men, set about with a stockade, and at the river edge a rude landing and a fastened boat. The restless search for mines of gold and silver now slackened. Instead, eyes turned for wealth to the kingdom of the plant and tree, and to fur trade and fishery. End that quote. The reality was bloody guerrilla warfare between white and red and between white and white. The Algonquians retreated before the superior firepower of the war parties dispatched by Dale and Gates. French settlements were also harried by the English. In 1613, Gates sent a 100-ton vessel called the Treasurer to the north to remove the French from Mount Desert Island. Its commander was Sam Argyle, the man who had kidnapped Pocahontas at Mount Desert Island. Captain Argyle is said to have fired the first shot in the 150-year war in America between France and England. He looted and burnt the settlement and set half the surviving Frenchmen adrift in an open boat. The rest were taken to Jamestown, where their reception must have made them long to be adrift with their comrades. As soon as Dale saw them, he spoke of nothing but ropes and of gallows and of hanging every one of them. For the English behind the Palisades along the James River, life continued to be grim. An unflattering but not necessarily wholly inaccurate picture of life in Jamestown was drawn by a Spaniard who was held prisoner there between 1613 and 1614. Don Diego de Molina had been captured after his ship was driven into the Chesapeake Bay. Now, he wrote a letter that was sewn into the sole of a shoe and somehow smuggled out to Madrid. Referring to the Virginia Company, he wrote as follows: the merchants have not been able to maintain this colony with as much liberality as was needed, and so the people have suffered much want, living on miserable rations of oats or maize, and dressing poorly. There is not a year when half do not die. Last year, there were 700 people, and not 350 remain, because little food and much labor on public work kills them, and, more than all, the discontent in which they live, seeing themselves treated as slaves with cruelty. End that quote. So recruitment and investment were not helped by a drip, drip, drip of complaint that were filtering back to England. Those who had pledged to invest now began to renege on their commitment. Gondomar, the Spanish minister, wrote to Philip III, here in London, this colony, Virginia, is in such bad repute that not a human being can be found to go there in any way whatsoever. What made the days still darker for the colony was the emergence of the Bermudas as a rival. In 1612, a royal charter authorized a settlement, and a party of 60 settlers landed. In honor of Sir George Somers, who had been so memorably marooned on the archipelago, it was renamed the Somers Island, and like Virginia, promoted as a paradise, but with no Native Americans to combat and a healthy climate to boot. The numbers of settlers tumbled in Virginia, but soared in Bermuda. By 1614, there were 600 colonists there, nearly twice as many as in the senior colony. The discovery of a gigantic piece of amber on a beach seemed to confirm that the islands, rather than the mainland, were the future. A rumor circulated that the company was to close down all operations in Virginia and relocate everyone to the new colony. Sir Thomas Dukes was so concerned that he wrote a personal appeal to Sir Thomas Smith. Typically, it pulled no punches, and it reads as follows. Let me tell you all at home this one thing, and I pray remember it. If you give over this country and lose it, you, with your wisdom, will leap such a gudgeon as our state hath not done the like since they lost the kingdom of France. I protest to you by the faith of an honest man. The more I range the country, the more I admire it. I have seen the best countries in Europe. I protest to you before the living God, put them all together. This country will be equivalent unto them if it be inhabited with good people. End statement. Dale need not have worried. Smith found the money to keep the Virginia Company going. He staved off one crisis by persuading the king to give him the go-ahead to do what the great Italian merchants in Venice and Genoa did and raise money by lotto, a lottery. It was the first lottery in 50 years and only the second in England's history, netting a staggering 8,000, the equivalent of 1 million today. But even that was not enough. In another crisis, Smith asked investors to forego their first dividend and accept the promise of a tract of forest somewhere in Virginia. Somehow, he persuaded them. Meanwhile, he was constantly going to court to pursue those who had reneged on investment pledges. It was now 7 years since the first batch of settlers had been brought by Christopher Newport, which meant the survivors were no longer tied to the company. Oh, yeah. They could go home or stay on as tenants. Of those who stayed, a favorite group, whom Dale referred to as farmers, were allotted a 3-acre garden apiece, 12 acres if they had families, and allowed to cultivate it as they pleased. But the company wanted a rental of 2.5 barrels of corn an acre, plus 30 days public service every year. The conditions imposed on the second larger group of stayers, the laborers, were even more onerous. In any year, they would have to work for the company for 11 months, leaving just 1 month to which to raise corn to feed themselves. This was a far cry from what had been promised 7 years earlier, but it was a start. Private ownership of land would begin to spread rapidly. Ralph Hamer, Dale's secretary, caught the importance of the change in a memorable comment once taught to every American child. Let's see what that is. Turning the page here. And it reads as follows. When our people were fed out of the common store and labored jointly together, glad was he who could slip from his labor or slumber over his task. He cared not how, nay, the most honest among them would hardly take so much true pains in a week as now they themselves will do in a day. And that story. Now, this dawning of private enterprise coincided with the discovery that a tobacco agreeable to the English palate could be cultivated in Virginia. Now, in 1613, the planter, John Rolfe, who later married Pocahontas, produced the colony's first commercial crop of tall tobacco, and it was shipped to England the following year. Gold hadn't been discovered, but here was a cash crop that would prove as valuable as the mines that the settlers had dreamt of. But cultivating it would need masses of labor and would be so arduous that few could bear it for long. The manpower wastage would be enormous. In London, the variety produced by Rolfe was an instant success. Very quickly, other planets followed Rolfe's lead, but Virginia's grim reputation kept immigration low. A new initiative was needed. In 1614, the Virginia Company lawyer, Sir Richard Martin, outraged MPs when he was allowed to address the House of Commons on behalf of the company and roared at them to stop wasting time on trivial matters and concentrate on saving Virginia. Martin demanded they set up a committee to consider how to populate the colony. England had lost one chance of an American empire when Henry VII turned down a request for backing from Christopher Columbus. But when Martin urged them not to lose this second chance, he was forced to come back the next day to apologize. So early in 1615, the Privy Council finally reached a decision on convicts. Francis Bacon's faction lost. Convicts would be transported to the New World. In presenting the decision, the Privy Council tried carefully. It is difficult to picture the rich, hard-nosed advisors of James I being overly concerned about the rights of vagabonds and felons. But this was a good period that was especially suspicious of arbitrary acts by the Crown against individuals. There was no law enabling the Crown to exile anyone, including the basest convict, into forced labor. According to legal scholars, the Magna Carta itself protected even them. The Privy Councilors therefore dressed up what was to befall the convict and presented the decree authorizing their transportation as an act of royal mercy. The convicts were to be reprieved from death in exchange for accepting the transportation. Wow. That's a bribe right there. The Privy Council's decree read as follows. Whereas it hath pleased his majesty out of his singular clemency and mercy to take into his princely consideration the wretched estate of divers of his subjects who by the laws of the realm are adjudged to die for sundry offenses, though heinous of themselves, not of the highest nature, so his majesty, both out of his gracious clemency, as also for divers weighty considerations, could wish they might be rather corrected than destroyed, and that in their punishments some of them might live and yield a profitable service to the commonwealth, in part abroad where it shall be found fit to employ them, to the extent that it is better to live than die. It was an act of mercy, in some degree, to send convicts to the colony rather than to the scaffold. Perhaps the scum would prove useful members of the colonial community and one day even earn their freedom in Virginia. But that was not the underlying intention. 4 years later, in 1619, the Privy Council made the intention clear. It ordered that convicts then sent to parts abroad were to be constrained to toil in such heavy and painful works as such servitude shall be a greater terror than death itself. To some, transportation did appear from the start to be worse than death. The Spanish ambassador to London reported home that 2 prisoners destined for transportation to Virginia had, like the convicts left on an African beach, pleaded to be executed instead. Immediately after the Privy Council's decision, 17 convicts were assigned to Smith, followed by a batch of 5, then a group of 6. It seems that Smith was allowed to cherry-pick from the condemned and select those he thought would be most useful. One man was saved from death on account of being of the mystery of the carpenters. King James had rather different ideas about selection. In the early years of his reign, he built a palace near the village of Newmarket in East Anglia, 70 miles away from London, which he hated. It was the king's favorite bolt hole. Away to Newmarket was the signal for extravaganzas of drunken feasting, masked jousting, and horse racing. At Newmarket, James paraded his homosexuality for all to see, as he indulged and openly fondled Robert Carr, George Villiers, and other male lovers. Anyone disrupting the prolonged roistering invited an outburst of royal fury. Sometime in 1817, a rowdy youths began to make nuisance of themselves at the court. Various explanations have been offered as to the nature of these youths, among them being that they were young, jobless men who made a practice of trailing around after the royal retinue, or that they were or that they were simply hoodlums or felons, or that they were the bastard sons of royal courtiers. Whatever they were, their crime is not recorded. Perhaps they specialize in baiting some of the ruffled and perfumed young men at court who hoped to catch the king's fancy. Whatever it was, something prompted James to explode, and he had the youths arrested. In January 1618, Sir Thomas Smith received a letter from the king saying that 100 youths were being dispatched to him to dispose of in Virginia at the first opportunity. They were described variously as dissolute or convicts, though there is no record of their having been tried in any court of law. The king instructed Smith to take sure order that they be set to work the colony. There were, however, no Virginia Company ships available in London or Bristol or Plymouth. And for all Thomas Smith's worldwide trading interests, he had no vessels to spare either, or pretended he did not. But the king would brook no excuses. Robert Cecil's successor as Secretary of State, Sir George Calvert, summoned Smith to Whitehall and banged the table. The king's desire admitted no delay. He was told, reluctantly, Smith and his fellow merchants in the Virginia Company put aside $1,000 to pay for the miscreants to be held in a London gaol until transportation was arranged. Smith feared that once they were at sea, the prisoners would break free and take over the ship, as we shall see when convicts became a major business, with up to 200 ships at a time. That is what happened again and again. So it was decided that the prisoners should be split into smaller, easily managed groups. At least 4 vessels were needed. While the company vacillated over their unwanted prisoners, 3 of the wealthiest stockholders saw an opportunity. The Earl of Warwick, Sir Edwin Sandys, and John Farrar had all acquired land in Virginia's sister colony, the Somers Islands. It appears they took advantage of the Newmarket affair to secure forced labor to work their plantation. The Virginia Company's minutes record the 3 applying for some of the distillate to be sent to the Somers Islands to be servants upon their land. Their fellow stockholders agreed. We do not know if all 100 convicts finally went, but given King James' determination to make an example of them, we can assume that they were dispatched to one or the other colony, or perhaps to both, probably never to return. The door was opening for the transportation of Britons unwanted to America. The first to come flooding through were street children. Now, let me see and check. Take a breather here, everyone. Has a lot to take in because this is proof of the fact that the murderers and the robbers and excuse me, Okay. The murderers and the robbers and the thieves. Oh, great. I was just getting ready to say, I'm going to check to see if Sister Anna E. has come in on the line because I figured you would have texted me by now, and I was getting ready to check for that text. There you are.
I didn't get your text.
Yes,
I did too. And I told you that I had unmuted. But
I didn't get it. You didn't get your text? Oh, my gosh, you know why? I'm looking at the screen from the text that I sent Ms. to make sure that I was on. I'm not even looking at my own text. I apologize, but sister, there you are in perfect timing because I do believe that was a mouthful. That was a large chapter right there.
It was. But before we get into I just want to make two points of reference because some of this stuff definitely want to look up. But I looked up because I remember I looked some time ago. In this chapter, they talk about a royal charter being issued. I'm going to read you a little bit of information on what I found, and I found this a couple of years ago when I was doing the research on the Charter of New York City. Now, this is right out of Wikipedia, so you don't even have to go too far to find information. It reads, Royal Charter. A royal charter is a formal document issued by a monarch as letters patent, granting a right or power to an individual or a body corporate. They were and are still used to establish significant organizations such as cities with municipal charter or universities and societies. Charters should be distinguished from warrants and letters of appointment as they have perpetual effect. Typically, a royal charter is produced as a high-quality work of calligraphy on vellum. The British monarchy has issued over 980 royal charters. Of these, about 750 remain in existence.
Say that again. Go ahead. No, go ahead.
About 750 remain in existence. The earliest was to the town of Tain in 1066, making it the oldest royal borough in Scotland, followed by the University of Cambridge in 1231. Charters continue to be issued by the British Crown, a recent example being that awarded to the Chartered Institute for the Management of Sports and Physical Activity, 2011. So all of these basketball, football, hockey, what else is there? Basketball, football, hockey, all of that, the management of that activity is based on a British Royal Charter. But no, you don't even know who is managing you as a commodity. Look at that.
Wow.
And then,
look at that.
Right? And I just want to also say, look, it said in here they were and are still used to establish significant organizations such as cities with municipal charters. I've been telling people for years, go and look up the municipal charters. Right? And have you done it? Have you done it? Now, the last I want to do is the Privy Council. The Privy Council of the United Kingdom is really the Privy Council of Great Britain / England, because England overtook. Her Majesty's Honorable Privy Council, usually known simply as the Privy Council, is a formal body of advisors to the sovereign of the United Kingdom. Its membership mainly comprises senior politicians who are currently or former members of either the House of Commons or the House of Lords. The Privy Council formally advises the sovereign on the exercise of the royal prerogatives, and corporately, it issues executive instruments known as orders and council, which, among other powers, enact acts of Parliament. The council also holds the stated authority to issue orders of council, mostly used to regulate certain public institutions. That would be your municipal corporation. The council advises the sovereign on the issuing of royal charters, which are used to grant special status to incorporated bodies and city or borough status to local authorities. Otherwise, the Privy Council authority has now been largely replaced by the Cabinet of the United Kingdom. So basically, that's telling you right there, this whole chapter, and even just these two pieces of information is telling you you are anybody calls it Virginia Commonwealth or some kind of government entity after listening to this recording, and if you are so inclined to purchase or download the book and read it for yourself, if you call it anything other than Virginia Company, you don't get it.
That showed so much. Oh my God! And this is why. And you've been telling people, listen, they're all companies. They're charities. They're corporations. That's what they were. That's what they still are. And when you look at what we just read now, I tried to take some notes and of course highlighted some things. But listen, the Algonquin, the natives. All right, stop. We have to realize that there's a big difference in this corporation chart. Yes. And our language has to change because of it. And how many people, including supposedly conscious Moors, do this? And look, the whole thing of commerce. When are we going to get that commerce is something that they were doing? It's not something that you need to be doing. Oh, certainly not that you shouldn't do merchants, but you understand what I'm saying? Like, be very careful of what you're talking about here. You know, wanting to get into bed with this, with that? No, not at all. You have to be the natural people. And is it true that eventually, after all of this, the Dutch, the French, the Virginia Company being the first, right, and that all the wars and, as you can see, discontent within them, we understand why they wanted their independence in 1776. My goodness. It's not yours, though. It is. This chapter right here shows you without a shadow of a doubt that, and it's coming up, 4th of July, isn't it? This is so appropriate. That had nothing to do with your freedom, nothing at all. So more conscious and unconscious, stop talking about we got our freedom in 1776. Please, this proves it. Oh, without a shadow of a doubt. Yes.
Not only that, people. They're telling you who the slaves of Morocco, this is Morocco/America. They're telling you who the slaves were and are, all right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, in 1776, they declared their independence. The only reason they could do that was because they had the support of the Moors here. Now, later, they went and they did the Treaty of Peace and Friendship because in order for them to stay here and for them to now manage the companies that they worked to set up for Great Britain, there has to be some sort of, what they call it, we're calling it the American Constitution, but it is the rules of what you must do to maintain your position on this land. That's what the Constitution, it says, look, we see what you went through as a people, and we're recognizing you as a human. And we're going to ensure that the things you endured never befall you or anyone else on American soil.
All right, again.
So now, the other thing that people got to be clear on, because I'm so sick to, I'm just so absolutely through with hearing people talking about the Emancipation Proclamation. That was not written for us. You got to look at the history that went on, in that time. Why Lincoln even wrote to the Moors of Russia to send aid. And Russia said, we will help you, but only if you free the slaves. The slaves that were freed was not us. We were not slaves.
Lay it down.
And the only reason that he wrote the Emancipation Proclamation, and we'll talk to that in a future day, the only reason he wrote the Emancipation Proclamation to free the modern Europeans, the slaves, was because Russia would not send them any aid unless they did. But they don't tell you that in history classes. So, but you know what I also do, because anyone who would like to join this conversation, because this is amazing information. This is the classroom today. I mean, it always is. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Sunday, it is always the classroom. But this right here, this information, it is a huge missing piece of the puzzle. And I'll say this. If you need this information, every Asiatic being out there needs information, because if you don't have this information, then you are going to continue to refer to yourself as the slave, and you're going to continue to refer to yourself as the Negro, African, Black, when that term implies those people who are not eligible to inherit. And in law, if you look at this history, this is the story that describes why they were called black, because they were dead in the eyes of the law.
The law.
This is the history. You need to know this. They were dead. They had no use. They were shipping them out like so much trash.
Yes.
And look at what he said. He said to send them out there and them to death. He said it there.
Say that again. I'm sorry. I don't know if that was me. He said to send them out there what?
He gave the order to send them to the Virginia Company and work them to death. He said it right in. You know, so, you know, people like say, oh, you know, you black people. No, baby. I am not the black people. And you know what's also funny? I was watching this episode of The Nanny last night, and one of these so-called wealthy people said, oh, well, you know, my family came over on the Mayflower, right? Now you know who the people that came over on the Mayflower. Those were murderers, convicts, and children. Children didn't survive, as you will see in the next chapter. But they also started sending over women for sex. They called it marriage. But they were sending the European women over to be sex slaves. So this is huge history that's not told. And why isn't it told? Because it's told by the very people who are the lineal descendants of this people. You can't put us in this mix right here, because for years you've been telling everybody we came from Africa. These slaves come from Britain, Great Britain, France, Portuguese, and the Dutch Republic, all of them modern Europeans. All of them, every last one of them, slaves.
One of them.
Surplus, they call them. We have a surplus of slaves. Send them away.
Yep. Yeah, and it's right here. Wow, and it all makes sense and ties in, you know, because, you know, everyone knows, and like we said when we went to Ellis Island even, that when they got here, you know, we were already here. That's why and they, dark melanated, that was us. Then they just mentioned it, all right? So this has nothing to do with us other than the omission of information or so-called education, because you're going to their schools and they decided they to omit it. I had said earlier, no, we haven't really been lied to. They just omitted some things. But then it takes me back to the prophet when he said, listen, all temples must have their own school. This right here is part of black, so that you can have your own, tell the story. Now, I'll tell you one other thing that really interests me, and I'm going to look into it. You know I am. Broadside is the name, not of a publication, but all publications were called Broadside. So, wow. And that's like because they're designed, I guess, to what do you call it? Advertise and or propagate whatever it is that you want to say. So yes, in a way, it can hit you. You know how people say, "Oh, you broadsided me," meaning I didn't see your comments type thing. Well, that is so appropriate for information that's being given out today. It broadsides a lot of people. You know, wow, eyes wide open, broadside, for real.
Exactly. Now, also, they speak of the Ulster plantation in this chapter. Now, I recall Ulster. Ulster actually, and I don't have to look it up, but you can look it up as well, because Ulster, if I'm not remembered, there was an Ulster Treaty. So I had to look into that. Another thing that they said in here, and I want to unmute some of the people so that they can join in the conversation. Another thing that they said in here, all those Moors who think we were slaves, they said that they were in negotiation with the people of Africa. Now, they different if they were talking about negotiating right in this chapter. I don't think I highlighted it. But I heard you read from here about, them having some sort of they put in some sort of a request to the people of what they're calling Africa. I think it was, I don't know if it was South Africa.
Yeah, South Africa. I'll try to find it.
Right now, and they tried to establish a colony, a plantation, initially on that landmass, which what is it, like 2 centuries or 3 centuries later, was the same location that held Nelson Mandela as a prisoner.
Yes,
that right there is telling you that we was not the stupid, idiotic people that they alleged we were if they had to go into negotiations with us to establish a colony on their land.
There you go. There it is.
They say it.
Yes.
So let me on you. Let's see. Anyone who would like to participate in this discussion, please press one on your telephone down. And what we're going to do is we're going to unmute everyone. And, just remember that you want to talk one at a time. We've been doing very well with this, so I'm just, just reminding everyone, because, when you get in the heat of, relaying a thought, or you get a thought, we can have a collision of thoughts. So the first caller, 215-630, you're unmuted. Of course, we got Bakari, Islam.
Islam. This is Tyrone.
Wanting to participate in the discussion at this time. Islam to everyone who's listening, and anyone who would one on your telephone dial, and you can join in and participate in the conversation. Before I turn it over, I would have asked Roz, how do you feel reading the whole chapter? Kind of thought going through your mind.
Yes, and I'm saying, okay, I'm not going to ad-lib anything, just read it. And yes, there's some things that just got me, and that's why I tried to take some notes on some stuff. We got to look up this guy, though, one thing, because I had to go back on it. Ali Kock. Ali Kock is A-L-I, like Ali, and K-O-C-K, and guess what they called him? An ancient. So there we are, that some of our people naturally was assisting in some of these activities,
Wow.
Well, from the British, because they were coming from over there. In fact, it was the British who were putting them into slavery because they had a surplus of them. You know what I'm saying? But yes, it felt, yes. And we'll go on and on.
Yeah, and here in this chapter, I believe, and in this chapter, it tells you that the court, London Company Court, did you she has it on page 4. It says London Companies Court or Board of Directors. So everybody going to these municipal corporations and they're saying, come on the court. You're going to sit with an elected official of the Board of Directors. There it is, right there.
I'm glad you brought that up because when I read that, that's exactly what went through my mind. We are not going to courts because if you want to know what court is, you read Article 3. It tells you, and none of those are that at all. And yes, when I read that, I said, "Wow, we are going to their corporate board of directors." You know what I'm saying? And one other thing, oh my God, yes, I did. I'm going back over to highlight that. I couldn't always highlight everything I wanted to and read at the same time. But yes. Okay, you just unmuted somebody that has too much noise going on. But maybe you could get back to them. But I got that. So I think Brother Bakar.
Okay, I'm available now.
We have three people.
Tyrone Howard L. from North.
All right, Pete.
All right.
We 3 people are muted, and the floor. Who would like to begin? With any kind of discussion, information, or revelation that you gleaned from this chapter.
Yes.
Well, this is if no one is ready, I can.
You got it.
I have a few things that I can share. This is Brother Bakar RVBey calling from northwest of Mexico. And what I would like to say is recently I had a unfortunate situation that an individual on a social media platform, YouTube, responded to one of my videos. And this individual was part of an organization that he refers to as a government, which is called the United States Republic. And he said that he is a Moor. So it is quite clear to me that this information not only clearly shows evidence of the status of those who were called colonizers, pilgrims, etc., and how they came over here, and how they manage, or rather demonstrate and shows how they came to be in the position that they are in today. It clearly shows the activities that led to where we are today on this landmass. It clearly shows the mentality of these individuals who were in control, who were pulling all the strings, that demonstrated, again, that they were not concerned about the well-being of their own people. They were concerned about the amount of land that they could steal and the wealth that they could draw from it. And so that was specifically for the use of those at the highest levels of their so-called government. It was not meant to be distributed throughout the masses of their own people. And it clearly shows and demonstrates that. And that is something that is overwhelming. That is something that needs to be disseminated to not only the masses of Moors, but to the masses of other nations of people who are, over here on this continent. And so, but it also shows the ignorance and or it's getting to the point to where I'm done trying to figure out who's an agent and who's not. But it also shows the wanton disregard for studying, and the ability for people to be misguided by those who call themselves scholars, and who haven't done anything. And so this is what you need to be involved in. And so I'm coming up on a couple of minutes, so I'm just going to say I yield the floor for now.
I want to. You might want to. Go ahead. I just have to say one more thing before the next person speaks. I don't know if you wanted to make a comment at what Brother Bakari just said. Huh?
Actually, no. No, I didn't. But there is one thing I did also want to point out that I'm sure a lot of people might have missed. On page 55, it says whenever a ship flying the red and white striped flag of the East India Company anchored in Cable Bay. Now, what a lot of people don't recognize, this is pre Treaty of Peace and Friendship, but the flying of the flag, for all those people who are confused about the passport, the flag was the passport. And it is also spoken of the Treaty of Peace and Friendship. So it's huge as to, I got feedback of movement. If you're confused as to, I got to go and apply for a passport, you really need to do a little bit of investigation, because the passport was never for human beings. Mm-hmm. It was. So people got to be really clear about that. This is unveiling a lot of stuff. But I want to hear what Brother Bakari, I think.
I just want to make one comment about what Brother Bakari just said right here on page 63. This Englishman had probably experienced nothing like it since their ancestors were made serfs by their Norman conquerors 5.5 centuries ago. So, yes, they did. And the other thing he says right after that, it says trading with Native Americans was a capital crime. I wanted to make this note. We didn't need to trade with them. They came to our land. We was fine. Matter of fact, the first ship that they landed in one of our trash esteems, or what would be a trash esteem. It was a place where they had flags, maggots, and we dumped waste. It's like a waste reservoir. That's where they landed. That's why they didn't make it too well at that point. So we didn't need to trade with them. We need to keep that in mind. And also just wanted to support what he said. Not that we needed to, because this whole chapter shows that they put their own into slavery. Islam.
Yes.
On you.
One more thing on page 65. It says one recurring proposal to rid the land of convicts was to exchange them with Christian galley slaves held by the Turkish or North African affairs. Turkish and North African affairs is Moors. They're the same people. They just give them new titles.
Islam. All right. That's Islam. Brother Sam.
I've seen that, yes.
Before you start, I just want to let the brother calling from 215-630. I had to mute you because you had a lot of feedback. I will unmute you, but you're going to have to mute your phone unless you're going to say something. So with that, Islam, Brother Asum?
Yes, Islam. Oh, man. Listen, honest to you, Annie, Eden, and Roz. This is a great topic. I don't know where to begin. I mean, I was taking notes. My computer had freezed up. But where I wanted to go with this was, it's just so many places. One place is that slave ship thing, and 500 or 600 slaves on a ship. You see, even in their biggest ship, at those times, they had 120 men, and then it took 19 weeks to get here.
Yeah.
You know, and then the mighty seas, how they took these ships off course and everything. So if it took 19 weeks to get here and 19 weeks to get back, you know, 20 weeks almost, and then that's pending you don't have no bad weather.
That's right.
You know.
That's
and,
right.
You know, and so just that matter, you know, this reveals and give you a look at. And then the Anglo-Normans, the Irish are dehumanized in the people. You know, first it was the children, second the Vagans for their petty crimes, and then third it was the Irish. You know, the Catholics and this thing. I mean, I just want to hit on so many points, you know, to spark some maybe conversation with people, you know. And then, like, it was all those dudes that came over, and then they was in fort, and it was a sodomy and all this other stuff going on with these dudes, you know. I mean, this thing, they was crazy. I mean, you know, they was beasts.
Yes.
You know?
Yes.
I mean,
he
wrote it. They were beasts. You know, the way they even treated one another and lived with each other. Just, you know, cold-blooded criminals. And then, not only that, you know, that's the petty criminals. Was that bad? Just imagine Sir Riley and them, you know, how they got their positions in leadership, you know, through the military. You know, him and his brother or half-brother, was like taking heads, you know, to even get a position that they had. I mean, they was just ruthless. They would sick them on, you know, the indigenous people, and they would come in and just slaughter. As a matter of fact, they had to be held back from slaughtering and killing them all. You know how ruthless these dudes were, you know. And so, you know, to write this here and for some to sort of like feel sorry for them when they pulled up and then all the arrows was coming, you know, like they didn't want them here.
Absolutely not.
They didn't want them here.
They were coming, what they say. I read in one in the beginning, it says they got off the daggone ship and they started walking and here it is, started naming stuff that was already named by the natives. But that was my next point, though. Yeah, okay.
And then how about the Richard the dude that he became the leading geographer to come and start changing maps. You know, start creating maps, you know, and drawing their artificial borders and things, you know.
Yeah.
And he was a so-called clergyman, you know. And then one of the things that Pascal wrote, men never do evil so completely and cheerfully as when they do it from religious conviction.
And this is all Christianity right here. If you read the Divina, they tell you this was our intent to kill all those who don't accept Jesus, which is Yahshua, which we already know who he is. He's our family, right? Like, as if we don't know. But they had a right by their God, whoever that is, right, to kill them if they don't accept their version of
Christianity.
That's what
if they didn't accept
their version of,
they didn't care nothing about no Jesus. It was their Christianity and worship our God.
Well, hold on. Let me say this. Well, hold on. The treaty, now that you said that, what does the treaty say? This is the treaty that allows them to sail here freely. Instead of coming here as slaves, as you can see in this chapter, they did come as, okay? And that treaty says between Moors and Christian powers.
Right.
You see?
That's right.
So it all ties in. It says Christian powers, not Christian nation, Christian powers, because that's who that's how they were rolling. There it is right there. So this is what we tell Moors, and also, and as you just said, and as we just witnessed, that they were coming over here on these ships, but they were coming as slaves. So when we put the peace to them, we were like, all right, first thing we're going to do is let you come, and we're going to tell everybody at the ports that are already existing, right, to let you pass through the port, the ship, not the flesh, the ship, but you must have on that banner, because they didn't have a flag, and that's when they got the red, white, and blues. When Betsy Ross, made the
That's right.
She was an upholsterer. She made that banner to put where on their ships, so that everybody would say, all right, that's their banner, or to pass the ports. That is exactly what it's for. It's called the ensign, ENSIGN, which is military. That's exactly what
That's right.
the treaty was for. And then after they got to the land, because of all the chaos that was ensuing, and that they were bringing to the Algonquians and to the natives, which is who we were, we then said, okay, this is the law of the land. Because the laws that they had and the rules that they had, I just read them. They were slave laws. All right, and servitude, and indentured slavery after 7 years, and all that kind of stuff. So we were like, no, this is the law of the land, and this, and he said, will keep you from ever experiencing what you experience, and also it keeps us from having to experience any control by corporations. And we just identified these corporations, and to this day, they're still operating and pretending to be something that they're not. Islam.
Exactly.
Oh, yeah, Islam. It's what, 1, 2, 3, 4. How many corporations did you name? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
There's a whole lot more now because they're enclaves of the same charter. That's what we have to recognize when we're dealing with enclaves of the same charter.
Right. But now we see also how Russia at that time and Japan at that time was involved in this trade also, when they started with the investments and with the stocks and everything from, who was it, the dude that became real rich. My computer had froze, but I was writing notes when I was reading this here last week. They called him who was it, Thomas Smythes, who was the first tycoon, the real
I would say it's Smith,
tycoon.
but it is Smythes, yes. Yeah,
Smythes. And where I used to domicile in, it's funny, in Pennsylvania, in one of the boroughs, it was a police chief. His name was Thomas Smythe, and he was from the Smythe family. And, and he had a big family there. But the other point I wanted to make is about the time period where he alludes to the time period of the whole 1500s. Was that? I mean, I think that's more important. That time period of the whole 1500s, because they keep referring to what they say 1,000 kilometers south of Virginia. They're talking about the Carolinas, all right?
Yes.
And the Spaniards had a foothold in there because they was given a charter in the 1500s on that piece of land there. Now, when we talk about Spaniards, we was having this here conversation for everybody. When you hear Spaniards, then you have to know what they are, all right? Because some of our people running around talking the Spanish and Spanish thing, they are Europeans, period.
Right.
The Spaniards, Europeans, period. Spain is in Europe, they were Spaniards, Europeans. All right. Now they made a bullet that all Moors were to be called Spaniards.
Spaniards. Thank you.
All right.
They just like right here in America, they're trying to be Americans, but they're not. They're not. Okay, I mean, they're
not
citizens. No. Exactly.
So people get confused with who they're talking about. See how they junk up the history. So now when they start writing about Spaniards, if you don't know that they're talking about Moors too, then you thinking they're talking about these Europeans, but they're talking about
That's
Moors
how they do
too. Now,
it.
we have to say this too. Some of those Moors was ruthless too. They took on Christianity, and they was ruthless too. And so when they was alluding to the slaves or the Slavics escaping and going south, and then they made a contract with the natives to track them down, all right, then it lets you know that this communication that they had with certain natives, that they had to trust them at some point, you know, to even contract with them.
I got to say this, you're right. When I first read that, and I was reading it, so I couldn't really comment, my spirit told me when they first came and the natives arrowed their behind, and then they kind of got back at some of them to a small degree, that they were converted, and that they may have helped them, but they could have helped them because they wanted to, like Moors do today, we call them Moorish, or they could have been forced into that position. Do you follow? Because remember, they didn't know the land. So if they captured any of them, you know, that was their fate and their plight. So that would be part of why, and the other part could be that they were ruthless. But I think over here, I don't think this is the paradise. Remember, it's called that for a reason. Yes. Most of the time, people definitely came here to live in peace and did, for the most part. It wasn't until they came that we had the serious upheaval and infiltration, if you will.
That's right, divide and conquer.
Like that. So that's what my spirit told me. It was a divide and conquer thing. And remember, they had sent, especially on that first one, the most notorious, as you mentioned, people here on those ships. So yeah, I that's what I got from that, and that began a serious infiltration. That's what I think.
Well,
also,
what you have to keep in mind is that we as a family, we were divided. Half of us did not want them here. Half of us did. You know, we were like, oh, everybody comes here. See, because people don't realize that there was a lot of different people coming to this landmass. The modern Europeans, they tell a story. They tell a story, literally, as though this was some barren forest land. No, there was cultures all over this land.
Over 200 they found it.
And not primitive cultures. So what we have to, and they were not modern Europeans, they were Moors. All right? Because we were traveling. You can listen to Ivan Van Sertima, and he will tell you how we knew about the waterways. We knew how to put together a little boat and jump in the right stream, and he tells you that stream current will take you right down to the Americas. You don't even have to.
We knew the time.
You don't even have to pedal. But
that's right.
Yeah. Those
we knew the time of the year to do that.
And those people that was helping track, those could, because even when you read the footnotes of the Articles of Confederation and the Treaty of Peace and Friendship, it tells you how the natives, or which really the Moors, some people were saying, some of the Moors were saying, you don't need that union. You don't need that union, because they were setting them up. And then other Moors would be like, you need to join the union for your protection. But there was other Moors that were like, you don't need that union. Stay independent. Yeah, stay independent. So you can be like a dog and wagging its tail out there.
That's right.
So,
and all through this here, they talk about ethnic cleaning, the dudes that they sent, like Humphrey Gilbert in 1569. Ethnic cleansing campaign to replace the natives, Irish plantations on with of the English Protestants and stuff. This dude would go in and just wipe out all the natives, and then, like you say, they would come and plant themselves there, and it just keeps talking about
they do that now.
all through there. That's right. And to Annie's point, also the I remember listening to a show a while ago when you was talking about how the fish was jumping out of the water and stuff.
That's right.
You know, here, and you had that when they were speaking about Biscayne and Portuguese and the French fishermen. You know, that was you know, here, and what did they do? Oh man, I wish my thing was up. Spanish and the Portuguese, St. John's and Newfoundland. I had wrote some notes as I was reading it, where I don't have it here, of what happened in that particular time. The gift of God, the ship's names, the squirrel, the golden hens, the gift of God, Mary and John. But these fisher ships, you know, the Portuguese and them there, and how what was it? He was traveling and then got knocked off course and went to the Caribbean.
Achipalopa, I think it was, and when you read the Intercaterra Divina, they mention all of those names. They tried to make claim on all that. Yeah, I know what part you're talking about. I got to go back to my notes too, but yeah.
No, broadside. 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 You know, you were talking about that. The good householder was a printing press, but broadside was the name of the. It says Moor broadside, bearded man, half-limb face, full wearing a
broadside and plural just means a publication. They were broadsides with different names. I think they gave the name of that one, but they used broadsides, which is publishing, is what they're saying.
Yeah, but I think broadside was the guy's name too that did the printing on cut wood and letterpress. Okay, go ahead though. It was a publication. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's a publication. Or publications. It seems like they used a many broadsides were printed or whatever, because in general we'll say like newspaper, but in general saying broadside means a publication, and I find that interesting. I'm going to look into that for sure. But I think there's another brother that had a comment.
Go ahead, I'll yield the floor. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think I just heard him. Okay.
I'm not sure.
She might have muted him.
I want to say one more thing. I also seen where it said right now the Broadside Summer History Camp they hold down in Jamestown Settlement, where each year where they teach the children about the Jamestown Settlement. Jamestown and the American Revolution, the settlement, a museum in Yorktown. It's a broadside camp there. It says broadside registration form. That's deep.
Wow, they probably use that name. That is so interesting. Wow, that is. And again, we must reiterate. They, like you said, Annie, they're telling a story, and they are telling. Like we just found, Dave just found, came up upon the Boy Scouts manual. It is amazing. As part of their membership, they had to know the history, and they laid that stuff down. But it always and only came from their perspective. When this is why we have to change our language. When they say rebuilt America, listen, that's a loose term because it was already here. They just told you when you're coming to the American land, they're just coming to it. So how could they build it? And then when you go to Ellis Island, they say what became the United States. That's not what they tell from their perspective only. So we need to period. Again, why we needed our own schools. So they're only telling from their perspective. And then we sitting back, oh, I don't know why they don't educate our children correctly. It's not their duty to. Can't you see? This is about them. And they're using your land, and acting like you're not even there, you know? And this is where you must stand. You must stand and make yourself known as to who you are, you know? Because, my goodness.
Yeah. We need a Moorish book guild, and a scour out
we
the
gonna have it all. We gonna have it all
that want to publish and start writing.
Hey, look.
Oh my
Somebody
goodness.
gonna be sitting 50 years, 100 years from now reading a book like this about us. I mean, there's already books about
That's
us.
right.
But about how, you know, how they took this whole colonist. See, here's the thing. Here's the key. Everybody needs to hear this. The colonists. You always heard about the colonists. The colonies were plantations. They were slave-holding plantations called forts, where they were the slaves. All right? That's what it is.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it was. It's theory. Now, who learned that in school? Nobody.
Right. You know, I'd like to add to that.
Sure.
Yeah, I you know, so many excellent points. So so you guys help keep this old man focused and so on. But
what old man?
You know,
wait a minute. What old man?
you know, brother, I see knows what I'm talking about when the joints start to creep. You know. Yes, sir.
Yoga.
But look, I want goodness, you know, like Brother Asim said, you know, there's so many things that we can talk about here, and so I'm just going to focus on a couple of them. And one of the things that I wanted to, you know, touch on, I think is the biggest point, so I'm just going to focus on that and keep it streamlined. So one of the biggest things that I heard when I started learning about law and history and about jurisprudence and things of that nature by some of our Moorish scholars who are still alive and kicking today is that the United States of America is, in fact, a corporation. It is not a landmass.
That's correct.
And so now I had difficulty with that initially until I started looking into the information and until I started, you know, reading a lot of the information that's on websites like RVBey publications. And then taking that information and then, you know, getting on the web and then not just believing it, but then, you know, matching it up to other sources of information in libraries and stuff like that. So the point that I'm trying to make here is that this reading, throughout this reading, it clearly demonstrates that that is in fact the case. Well, how does it do that, Bokhari? It does that because of the way it mentions charters and companies associated with the colonies, which now today refer themselves as states, corporate states. So when young people and old people alike, Moors and other those of other nationalities hear elders you know, speak to this fact, you know, sometimes they think, these guys are just, you know, some sort of crazy nuts. But, you know, the fact is clear, you know, nothing. Well, another thing that can add to that is when you talked about, I forget who it was that mentioned the term when they received like royal charters, right? So where I'm going with this, now that I've just addressed the fact that the U.S.A., the United States of America, is in fact a corporation, a consortium of individuals who today are the descendants of those that were forwarded over here to conduct specific actions. the actions that they took place initially didn't kick off, with the kind of steady progression, steady. When I say steady, like I mean constant, but they stuck to it, and the intention was to take the resources. That's clear. That from this reading, that is clear, and they did not concern themselves with it, in terms of lives and and things of that nature. Their own people were not exactly. They were in fact expendable. Now, through my own research prior to this book reading, I came up on a term called a royal colony. And I don't want to make an assumption, but royal charter and royal colony, very interesting. Now, the items that from my own research that I found were, or rather the locations that I found that were royal colonies, and I'm not saying that this is totally correct or that they're because my research is, it's new and it's ongoing. But there were 8 of them. They were Virginia, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, North Carolina, South Carolina, New Jersey, New York, and Georgia. And so I only mention that because maybe Anna Eid or maybe Razamaya or Brother Asim can touch on that. But as I yield the floor, as I prepare to yield the floor, it is clear that there can be no doubt in my mind, based on information that is in this document, or rather in this book, that when we call when you hear Anna Eid and when you hear Rasamaya and you hear other elders say that you cannot, like when you call into the show, like you cannot say that I live in New Jersey or I live in Texas or I live in Georgia. This is where that is coming from. This is where that and I yield the floor. Islam.
Wow. I just like to say one thing. What you just said is called jurisdiction. Juris meaning right and diction meaning words. This is where it's, I'm glad, it's funny, Bakari, because that was going through my mind. It was going through my mind, and you just brought it to the surface. So I don't have much to say about it except that, yes, you are absolutely correct. Correct. Just as we can't call their establishment courts, that we can't call their establishment courts. We just found out what they really are and who they're really for. And, I was skimming through here. It's funny that we should say this. I just dropped the page, and it said something about attorneys. I know I'm ahead of myself on it, because after this chapter, where they talk about the children of the city, then after that they talk about they are not dogs, and that's the chapter name, and Spirited Away. And I was just going through, and I just read about attorneys. So that's going to be another thing when we get to that. So I'm not even going to bring it up. When we get to that, the people will understand why you cannot, I tell you, you cannot hire an attorney or be an attorney. Well, you can if you want to, but if you don't know what it is. That's why when you hear Moors that are supposedly conscious and they're referring you to attorneys, okay, those are infiltrators, period. So, yes, that's jurisdiction. Yes, this is why. But when they said they came here, they said this was the American land, and that's how they pronounce Morocco. All right, we know it. You need to continue to say that. When they say, you cannot say, I live in Tennessee, I live in Texas.
Right.
It's a corporation. It is incorrect, and you are, at that moment, putting yourself and giving jurisdiction. You are on the American land estate, period. If they say, in the jurisdiction of the city of Texas, you were, driving on Main Street or whatever, like speeding on Main Street. No, in the jurisdiction of my ancestral estate, because North America, I was traveling on whatever. It is so important to have the right words, and that's what jurisdiction is. And so when we go in and say that, we don't realize that we just gave it up and admitted to being inside their corporation, which is not something you can step on. Islam.
That's right.
Islam. Islam. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
What I wanted to take a shot at the Royal Charter, and I'm not sure about the Royal Charter, but from what I'm reading from here, where when they were so unsuccessful, because they was putting up their own money at the time, and even the Queen or the King was putting up money, all right, and they said, oh man, forget that. So when they came up with this stock thing, and they created this the Royal Council in London, and they started taking shares, what they did, they created a new company, and they formed it with a governor who was a dictatorial powers. Then the new Royal Council in where they had who stayed in London, and then London's company court or the board of directors, and then they established a company treasurer, all right, and then I take it that those other I'm not for sure because I didn't do none of my own research, only from what I'm going into here, but I'm taking it that this, when they establish this new company and they start offering these shares, what they called it, a stock, a joint stock company. Broadside argued for a stock, all right, and that was because actually I guess they was becoming bankrupt because of the failures that they was having, and they said, okay, we're going to share this thing with all the nobles and whoever can come up with money and purchase these stocks, and started this here stock company, and then they created another entity, all right. And when I see this here, I don't take it as they created another entity, just that it became a subsidiary from what I understand. The way that I look at it, because like we say, the the Plymouth Company and the Virginia Company, it still exists now. But then they created a new subsidiary company, started taking on stocks because it would be governed a little different than the way that they were raising money for those, and then for those voyages and stuff like that. So they created that, and they called it the Royal. What did they call it? The Royal Council of Virginia,
Yeah.
And then they created that new company, put those people in, made that council where you see, like when you watch Shark Tank and stuff like that, people come with their ideas or with their company, ask you how much money you got in it, then we're going to help you, but we're going to put our people on the board. So they created these this London, this new Royal Council, which stayed in London, so that they can have some say-so in it. And then they sent the governor, and then they had the trustee, and I guess they were streamlining this thing now because, we said before, what they did in Europe with the invasions and coming in and knocking out the natives, the indigenous, they only brought that practice over here, but they had practice doing this here. And so with the ships and the failing and the way that they was raising money to get it done, they already had the people in place, their generals and stuff in place to come in and do whatever work. But the way they was raising money, people were saying, look, you ain't getting no more money like that, so let's start this here stock company, and they called it this here royal thing. And the reason I'm saying that is that the companies that you named, all right, with North Carolina and this and that royal company had to come into play a little later on in the 1600s, because we know that Spain had a foothold in there, but they had a problem. We read in the earlier chapters when the Virginia Company wanted to expand it south, and they couldn't get a foothold down in the Carolinas, and they lost that voyage and stuff, and so they stayed up in Virginia and fortified themselves in Virginia. You know, and so those new companies that he named had to come as a result of, you know, trial and error, and then they must have made some kind of deals with the Spanish, because when we read the Sun Free Drive Moor Act, where these Portuguese captured those Moors, all right, and the Sun Free Dry Act was to say, okay, Moors, your status is white, all right, and you can stay here. What I'm getting at is that by that time they had inroads. The London company had inroads into the Carolinas and stuff like that. So I was rambling a little bit, but when I hear that Royal Company and then those companies that Bakari had named, I know that company came a little later because but they were part of the older companies too, Massachusetts and stuff like that. So that's why I said they was a subsidiary. Islam, let me yield the floor with that.
Islam, I just want to let everyone know it's 10:25, and the line will go down in 4 minutes. You know, time always flies. Having fun. So
we've only been on the phone
this
for
is great. This brother here that I said wanted to speak, that I thought he was gone.
Well, no, I
think
it was. I muted the 510-334, and there was just a lot of feedback. 510-334. I'm not sure if you wanted to participate in the conversation.
Islam, I'm just having a great time listening and learning. And,
all righty. All righty.
Yes.
All righty. Well, thank you so much for that. But it is 26 after. The line is going to go down in like 2 minutes.
This has been great. It really has.
This is the fourth Wednesday, and next Wednesday, I believe, is the first Wednesday of the month. So we'll be back. Yep, it's the 5th. So we'll be back here next Wednesday for another installation of White Cargo. For all of those, next Wednesday. For everyone
I'm saying the next chapter is Children of the City. God.
Yes, and that gets really, really interesting. So for everyone who ordered the book or downloaded the book and has been reading the book, fantastic. Thank you so much. Of course, Asim and Bakari, thank you so much. We had another caller, but they didn't say anything. Caller 215630. Thank you so much for joining the conversation or listening or participating. But we would really like more people to participate in this conversation. Let us know your thoughts. What kind of revelations did you have as you listened? And, you know, what dots were connected? So if you haven't read the book, I'm going to put it up on the website. I was just seeing if I had put it up on the last Wednesday, but I didn't. So you will see it by tomorrow. It'll be up on the moorishnews.wordpress.com under today's class. You can download it. I'm a hard copy girl. I need to highlight and make notes, and I already started doing that. So with that, thank everyone who participated, joined, listened, and we shall see you on Tuesday for MHHS Eyes Wide Open Wednesday for the next installment of our reading of White Cargo. So peace and love to everyone.
Peace and love. Thank you, everyone.
Peace and love.
All right.
I enjoyed it.
Right now at Gap Factory and Banana Republic Factory, save 50 to 70% off everything in stores and online. That's right, 50 to 70% off everything. Celebrate the 4th with dresses from $19.99 at Banana Republic Factory. And at Gap Factory stores, tees,